Welcome back to the PHX Founders podcast. Here with me today, I've got Anthony Kennada, the founder and CEO of AudiencePlus. Anthony, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Greg. Excited to be here.
Good to have you. Building an awesome venture-backed company here in Phoenix. Repeat participant here in company building here in Arizona. So excited to have you here.
Oh man, wouldn't want to be doing it anywhere else. So I'm excited.
Hey, give us a quick overview of what AudiencePlus is, and then we'll go back and talk a little bit about your upbringing, your education, some of your career experiences, what you're experiencing as a founder. So, but tell us a little bit about AudiencePlus just to get us going here.
Yeah, so AudiencePlus is a marketing platform that helps companies better leverage their content, become their own kind of channel of distribution for content in an effort to build a direct relationship with their audience. And so a lot of what we've been doing for years in marketing is borrowing that relationship through social media, through earned media from a sort of PR perspective, or paying for that relationship through paid media. And what we've sort of learned is those, from a efficiency perspective, those are very difficult channels to really scale if you're trying to not spend a lot of money. And ultimately, we're just seeing kind of the changing consumer kind of trends where people are following their favorite creators off of social media and they're directly subscribing to them for content. And so what we're building is effectively an underlying platform that helps companies distribute that content, build that subscriber relationship with the audience, and then underneath it all, understand the data and analytics around their engagement and how that engagement translates to revenue.
It does feel like there's a new movement in marketing happening where before I could pursue certain activities to build brand, but now I've got to truly build audience and build a following, build a community, which is next level.
Totally. Yeah, we didn't really use the word audience, it feels like, until the last few years in the B2B construct as well.
Totally.
We talk about personas and those types of things, but it really feels like there's this like consumerization of the B2B marketing practice happening. And I think that, hopefully we're in the right kind of place in the right time to help kind of usher in this new era.
Well, we're going to talk about your career and what led up to this point and what was it that made you want to take the crazy leap to start this company here. But I want to start back earlier. I'm always interested in the real founding story, which is your childhood, and how, what was it about your childhood that maybe would have been early indications you were going to start a company or anything like that? I mean, certainly our formative years shape who we are as adults. So we'd love to hear about a little bit of your childhood.
Yeah, it's one of those things that only looking backwards, you're like, oh wow, maybe I am in the right place, for what I'm doing. So I was a only child, born to an amazing woman, a single mother that immigrated here from Lebanon, and so first generation American. Grew up, if you picture like my big fat Greek wedding, that was basically my childhood, but only child was sort of the nuance. And so, spent a lot of time dreaming and just being, kind of alone. And so I think that helped kind of maybe feed some of the creative kind of neuroplasticity happening in the brain from the early days. I remember getting a computer kind of halfway, maybe in my, early teens or so. And this was back in like the Napster kind of LimeWire era. And I got like a CD burner. And I thought that was really cool to just be burning CDs. And really kind of what happened from the marketing lens is I ended up taking these random like student jobs over the years that all kind of pointed me towards marketing inadvertently. So I was on the prom committee in high school, which is very random. My job in college was to produce concerts for Pepperdine University. So, everything from booking talent to selling tickets to trying to like run a financial model for the event to actually producing the show. So events were sort of a big part of kind
events
of
and experiences were a big part of where you came from.
Totally. And, several other things that I think, I look back on now and I'm like, gosh, I didn't know it at the time what I wanted to do. But I've had this sort of like lived experience around marketing more than even being classically trained in the discipline. And I think that's helped kind of shape me into who I am today.
I love it. First of all, is there any good Lebanese food in Phoenix?
There's a place called Green Corner that is actually super authentic, and it's great. So
Green
there's
Corner.
A few in the valley. Yeah.
Maybe
Shout out
we can get that link in the show notes here and let people go. That's good. The other thing I was going to ask you about that is, I'm not at all joking here. I do wonder if I couldn't deliver as an investor top tier returns with a simple investment strategy of investing behind immigrants or the sons and daughters of immigrants here.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Is there something? What's the unique experience that you had as the son of an immigrant?
Yeah, I think for sure there's the appreciation for my mom and that side of the family, like literally leaving everything they knew in the 70s and kind of moving to a country where they didn't know the language and all of that. So obviously there's a bit of like a responsibility to sort of like be a good fulfillment of that sacrifice. That's definitely running kind of in the background, but also I would argue just being kind of a product of a divorced home as well in that context is really interesting. I don't have a ton of role models in my life around what successful entrepreneurs look like. Later in life, I would meet several, or great fathers or parents, husband, these types of things. So a lot of what I've had to do in my life was really formed around first principles, like, hey, like what does great look like in each of those boxes? And I've had to kind of figure it out myself. Definitely didn't get it right in every attempt. But I do think that's helped form me into who I am. So I have a lot of, give my mom a lot of credit for that and our background. And so it's definitely put a chip on my shoulder, I would say.
I love it. I think there's some recurring themes there for sure. I see in other founders, but chips on shoulders is definitely one. So thank you for sharing that. Also, I would say, just in talking about this and knowing you a little bit, introspection, I think, is also a superpower. And I think the most successful people usually have an aspect of introspection and vulnerability that is a major unlock in the way they lead, in the way they attract talent. So you can tell that in your conversation here. So thanks for that.
Of course.
Let me ask you a little bit about your education experience, particularly in college. You talked a little about the college job here, but college and then kind of first job out of college and where you went from there.
Yeah, I was a bad student. I was. I really wish I found my transcript the other day, and it was brutal. I'm surprised that they let me graduate. But at the end of the day, I was very involved on campus. So like there was this weird juxtaposition where I was involved with like student organizations. There's a fraternity that I was a part of. There was, international programs. I did everything but do well in the classroom, basically. And so I didn't have, talk about chip on shoulder. It's sort of like, gosh, can I graduate and actually do something with myself and prove that, hey, you can be successful without having a 4.0 GPA in college or whatever. So my first job out of college, I graduated in 2008, which was a great time to start a career. The market just crashed. And my job at the time was to be a recruiter, a tech recruiter for companies up in the Bay Area. And so this was, again, a really tough time. The only thing harder than finding a job was helping other people find jobs in 2008.
Unemployment rate was probably like, I remember what, 8, 9, 10%, something like that. Pretty high. Yeah,
exactly. And so I was cold calling and I had to learn basically enough buzzwords around basically the engineering practice to sound smart. And so, you'd cold call like a VP of engineering for, a Bay Area based company at a 650 area code, while we were in Southern California. I said that, hey, we got a great engineer coming out of Facebook. He's great at the lamp stack, like PHP. And I'm saying things, I have no idea what I'm saying. Ultimately to try to book the meeting and get the engineer placed. So I actually was successful in placing one engineer during that time, and it was with a company called Box. Very early days for that business. And so what ended up happening was our little recruiting practice went under, like many companies did in that season. But I had built that relationship with that hiring manager at Box. And so I emailed him I said, hey, like, I worked hard for you on the outside. Like, would you give me a shot on your sales floor? Basically just like asked for an opportunity. And he connected me to the sales team. Asked me, after a few phone calls, they asked me to come out to Palo Alto to meet Aaron Levy and the early team there. And I got the job on the spot, basically as an entry-level SDR at Box. So I drove back down, packed up my car, moved back to Palo Alto, and started my kind of journey basically in tech, off of a failed attempt at being a recruiter.
How many employees were at Box then?
37
Okay.
when I joined.
Okay.
Yeah, so very early days.
Yeah. Aaron Levy's great. Such a great story.
He's awesome. Yeah. It was a great intro to like startup life. At the time, I was actually I was working on a startup of my own, so the entrepreneurial bug had been there, and I took the job at Box to moonlight, which I think we'll talk about quite a bit here in the sense that I felt like I had to be there. I had to be in Silicon Valley in order to make a name for my whatever, right? To move my career forward. And so I moved there basically to start my consumer travel startup that I was working on, and moonlighting at Box to pay the bills. But as I learned very quickly, entrepreneurship is very hard, especially when you don't know what you're doing back then. And the cloud, of course, took off. And so Box's position really evangelizing, cloud computing, again, 2009 or so at this point. That's sort of kind of what got me my start in SaaS in particular. And I haven't looked back now. What is it? 15, 16 years later.
A couple things we didn't talk about, but you mentioned not being a good student in school. I do wonder if, I think there's a lot of really brilliant people that were incredible students and have a really impressive academic background. I also think there's an equal number of us who, were, our average didn't start with an A. It started with a B or a C.
Right.
But what maybe we lacked in academic performance, there were other things related to grit, resilience, persistence, drive, and and other things that kind of matter probably more.
Yeah, I would argue my experience in my fraternity, I know fraternities in general have like maybe a not so great kind of thing or perception, but I learned how to be part of an organization. I learned how to develop relationships, how to serve in leadership positions. So I credit that experience quite a bit because those are things that are hard to learn in the classroom.
For sure.
There's an application to that learning that happens. And so I definitely got a lot out of my college experience. Don't get me wrong. I'm a huge supporter of Pepperdine today. But I do think I'm a better entrepreneur, executive, marketer because of, to your point, that these
other experiences.
Yeah, for sure.
So what was the thing and I didn't mean to go back to college, but tell me more about the Box experience. Were there one or two lessons you learned from being around a company, being employee 37, and with cloud taking off like crazy? When you start thinking about the availability of public cloud, AWS probably came on in around, 2008 maybe, and Azure maybe, Azure was maybe 2010 or something like around that same time. What was the thing, being part of that explosive growth, what was the thing, maybe one or two lessons you took from watching the team at Box, the execution, either good or bad?
Yeah. I think one of the things was for me more of being a part of a startup is what I experienced, because again, you go to college and you get a business degree, you're wearing like a blazer and a suit, and you think you're going to carry your briefcase and go to work every day. And there were engineers sleeping in the conference rooms. Like I would be one of the first people in the office, and somebody would be like cooking like pancakes on a George Foreman grill, like smelling up the whole office. I'm like, what is this place? Like this is startup life. And there was something so approachable and fun and integrated into life that really was an amazing kind of starting point for me in my career. The second one was Box's ability to like make enterprise software seem cool. Because enterprise, when you think about like the historical kind of Oracle and some of these kind of, giants, like there's nothing, forgive the term, like sexy about working in enterprise. And I think Box did a really good job of making it feel consumer-ish in approach and positioning and how they kind of went to market in the product itself.
That must have been pretty informative for you, given where you are, now. But what was it that they did? Because they really had to convince CTOs to fundamentally change their behavior when you think about like making enterprise software, but also the behavior change required by CTOs was not insignificant. It seems like.
I think one of the really smart things they did is they picked an enemy. They made an enemy out of SharePoint. And so I remember SharePoint is basically, if you were to oversimplify it, the on-premise alternative to Box. And so they, kind of printed T-shirts with like the no SharePoint logo. They would go to conferences, and I remember that there was this like lipstick on a pig campaign around SharePoint. Some weird things. They probably wouldn't want to reference that one anymore. But by depositioning an incumbent, they sort of also positioned themselves as the next generation, as innovative. And so I think that was really smart because they got themselves into the conversation with Microsoft, who owned the relationship with the CISO, CIO, or whoever. And so I think that was something that they did pretty early on in their evolution, or at least right when I was there, and they were transitioning from being kind of a consumer grade file sharing Dropbox type of product to going all in on the enterprise.
Yeah, picking an enemy and carefully positioning against that enemy is really powerful. Salesforce did that, of course.
Yes, for sure.
As well as anybody. I didn't mean to gloss over your travel startup idea. I skipped over that part of it. What ended up happening with this?
I still renew the domain every year. One day.
What's the domain? Are you gonna tell us?
Shout out, socialabroad.com.
Socialabroad.com. Okay.
I studied abroad, and that was one of the most formative experiences of my life. And we had this this map that we passed down to the next kind of folks coming in, where we would update the best restaurants or the best bars or experiences in these different in the town to try to keep it relevant for the next group that was coming in. And I was like, gosh, there's something really compelling about that, because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated, and I thought I would just travel and find a way to this before travel blogging or anything. Travel and get paid for it was my inspiration. And so the idea came from that map thing that we would update. And I was like, well, what if we developed like the Frommer's books? Do you remember those travel books? Yeah. But did it through the lens of a student who isn't looking for the Ritz-Carlton in Paris. Right. They're looking for the best experience for the lowest cost. Right. And so what if we wrote those books? And this was, again, 2008. Facebook had been out for 2 or 3 years at this point. I'm like, gosh, I don't know if writing books is the sort of method for this. And so we started going down the path of, all right, well, what if we built a social kind of network for students and the student and youth kind of travel community, where we would effectively think of it like a Yelp for through that lens. And so that was kind of the original concept. I got a book by Guy Kawasaki called The Art of the Start. And that taught me basically how to put a PowerPoint deck together to pitch investors. Got kind of a core deck together, and I would go on LinkedIn and I would search for people in my fraternity, actually in the Bay Area, that worked in the internet industry. And I'd send 100 cold messages asking them if they would be willing to let me buy them a cup of coffee and get feedback on the deck. And send 100, I would get 10 that would respond and 5 that would be willing to meet me. And so I'd drive up from LA to Palo Alto, meet with them, drive back down, edit the deck, send another 100. And that was sort of how we kind of started building Social Abroad. But again, hard, consumer travel too. And is a tough industry. Didn't know what I was doing outside of the book and getting some feedback, which was good. But we raised a little bit of friends and family around, and I put all of the capital into basically rebuilding Facebook. So we built like a profile concept. And again, there weren't APIs for this. This wasn't open source back then. And so definitely burned whatever small capital we had raised and went back to work as an SDR at Box. And the rest
the thing about that story though, that I love is what I heard you say is you tried really hard to do something different, differentiated, unique. Yeah. And that seems to be, we're going to get more into this about kind of category creation in a minute. And I know that's been fundamental to what you've done, but being truly differentiated is something clearly you were trying to do there. Totally. Competing with Facebook might be a little hard, but
turns out
as it turns out, but pursuing something unique was clearly fundamental. So what happened after Box? What was next?
Box, I was in the Bay Area now for about 2 or 3 years, and honestly, I missed home. I missed LA. And so I went on to Craigslist and I searched enterprise software because I'm like, all right, now I've got something going with this cloud computing thing in Los Angeles to see if there were any jobs that were popping up, and 2 showed up. I forget the other one, but on the other end of one was this company called Live Office. And so I filled it out, there's some BD kind of role there. And on the other end of that random Craigslist outreach was Nick Mehta, who was the CEO of that company at the time. And so he would go on, of course, to be the CEO of Gainsight, a huge mentor to me in my career. So I met him on Craigslist. And so I moved down to LA and take that job basically because I missed home. And I was responsible for running the OEM relationship that we had just signed with Symantec. Mm-hmm. And so, a couple great years working there, built up the relationship, and we ended up getting acquired by the partnership that I was running in Symantec. So moved back over to Symantec, moved back to the Bay Area as a result, and took on a product role. It kind of took a weird right turn there in my career. But built up this product team at Symantec for an organic product that they were building. Symantec's a super acquisitive company at the time. And so this was one of the first kind of 0 to 1 level kind of product initiatives that they were running. That was my first exposure to big tech, if you will, or at least from the security kind of lens.
So was this 2020, maybe 2011, 2012?
Yes.
2013,
right.
okay.
About 2011, I think.
Okay.
Which was actually a tough time for Symantec. There was the CEO had I think been ousted. My boss left, and so basically what happened is like all of these people above me left or were terminated or something, and so I ended up reporting to the president of the cloud division, this gentleman named Rowan Trollope, and so I got a lot of exposure for like 23 years old or whatever it was at the time, and learned quite a bit. But the biggest thing I learned was I miss startups. Like I do not belong in this environment.
In a big company.
Yeah, it was like a committee to decide if the button should be blue or green or whatever. And I'm like, gosh, I miss being agile.
I want to poke my eyes out if I'm in that kind of meeting, right? Yeah,
exactly. So I was at Symantec, sort of unhappy. Was driving up from Los Angeles back to the Bay Area after a trip, and it was a Sunday night. And I remember it was just before I lost cell phone reception there in the Grapevine, and I got a call from Nick Mehta, my CEO from Live Office. And it was weird because I haven't talked to him in a while. And again, it's a phone call on a Sunday night. And on the other end of that call was an opportunity to basically join him in his new venture, which would eventually be called Gainsight. It was my first marketing job. And I didn't know it at the time or what he was doing. Or all I knew is that whatever he wanted on the call, I would follow him blindly into the dark, just given that's the type of leader he was. And
he's really a remarkable leader.
Amazing.
Yeah.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the story of how I had worked now in sales and BD and partnerships and product, and then started at Gainsight in 2013 as my first marketing job ever with zero marketing experience beyond concerts and failed travel startups.
What was it that do you think Nick saw in you?
Yeah.
So he knew you didn't have a marketing background and he needed a marketing person. Yeah. What made him call a non-marketing person, like as far as a traditional kind of marketer? What made him call you? What was it about you that he's like, I've got to have Anthony on my team here?
The story was he remembers like one presentation I gave.
Interesting.
And again, I was 22, 23 at the time, probably when I gave it, actually maybe even younger. And it was in front of like the whole company basically talking about the Symantec partnership. And I think he liked the way I like framed the deck and the story and the narrative, and the slide was clean and all of that. And he references that as like at least what triggered the thought in his head to reach out to me.
That's where you got your street cred in Nick's.
Apparently, yes. I'm really glad I showed up to work that day and delivered that presentation. But he cites that as the sort of light bulb moment for him and his sort of compelling reason to reach out.
Cool. So let's talk about Gainsight. I think that's such an interesting part of your background. And when I think about companies that have pursued category creation successfully, they're on the very, very short list.
Yeah.
At least, certainly in the B2B context of companies who have successfully created and dominated a new category. And I know you've written a book called Category Creation as part of that experience, but tell me more about Gainsight. We can touch on any part you want, but I'm particularly interested in the category creation. I think a lot of companies we invest in at Phoenix Ventures and a lot of people we talk to are trying to do something new, trying to do something different, trying to create a category. And so I think there's a lot of learning for our listeners on what you experienced, how you created a category, lessons learned, all that good stuff.
Well, yeah, and certainly I think going back to my background, you can imagine stepping into this role now as the head of marketing. The company is called J. Barra Software. It was based in St. Louis, Missouri. We had about...
I can see the logo actually in my mind.
It? Yeah. There's about 3 customers that we had. I think they were paying us, cumulatively or whatever, under 100K.
Well, I can see the logo because I remember seeing something when the Gainsight name kind of came out. I remember that because we were looking for a new customer success product. Yeah.
And so, there was a lot of work to do, and I didn't know much of how to do it. And so one of the things that we did that was kind of, looking back, weird, but at the time felt natural, maybe coming from Symantec, is we started briefing Gartner and Forrester, again, super early in our kind of journey of building the company. And we talked to them about kind of our vision for the product, how our very limited customers were using it. And what was interesting is all of the feedback from the analyst community was basically to position this business in something that didn't feel very authentic to our understanding of the business or our perception of the customer pain, but also like weirdly aligned to their research areas that would make sense for them to sell us services or whatever around. And so when we talked to Gartner, they would say, you're a proactive customer support. And we're like, gosh, that doesn't feel right. Support is this sort of reactive thing where CS was this sort of more proactive type of approach, or you're like the next generation of CRM. And we're like, good Lord, like we cannot take on Salesforce. Have you seen our website? It's not even close. And so we were sort of fatigued a little bit going through that process. But what we had observed was there was this persona called the customer success manager. We didn't name it. It existed already. If you looked at LinkedIn, there were probably less than 100 of them that actually existed at the time. Most of them worked at Salesforce, actually. But they would meet on this LinkedIn forum that we were invited into, and they would do these sort of like impromptu events around the Bay Area. So we went and sat in on one of these events, and it was like pizza and beer and soda, like nothing fancy or anything along those lines. But there was this feeling in the room of like, oh my gosh, I'm finally around other people who are going through what I'm going through. This is my tribe. And we're just like on the, watching this, but we could feel it. There was something special about getting these people together around this shared sense of conviction and purpose. And so the sort of, road, the break in the road was, do we go down the path of the analyst community and take a challenger position against Salesforce or Zendesk or whoever, or do we just radically serve this persona or this audience in a way that would just help them facilitate more of those opportunities for them to get together and share their scars and compare notes. And so what we did as a hypothesis was, to test the hypothesis, was really kind of random. We hosted a conference. We hosted an event of our own, thinking that, okay, if they got like 10, 15 people together in this like random office park, pizza and sodas, if we put some like, venture capital behind actually producing an event, would people come? Can we create that same sort of energy or whatever that was felt in that room? And so we did, and we had over 300 people there. And only a few months later, Aaron Levy and Jeffrey Moore were our keynote speakers. And the amazing thing was that feeling was just magnified and multiplied around this idea of focusing on the audience, not on us. And there wasn't a show about our product. It was all about the problems and the pains and the sort of solutions for the job of customer success. And so that went really well. And so we didn't know we were creating a category or anything at the time, but we said, look, there's something to this owning this customer success narrative. And again, not taking this position that we are the experts at it, but building the stage and convening the experts, but having them do it on our sort of under our flag, if you will. And so that one-time event became a annual event that scaled to over 6,000 attendees in San Francisco.
This is the Pulse Conference.
Yep. Sister events in the UK and Australia every year. We did a virtual kind of event. We had 50 self-organized communities of customer success professionals in 50 cities around the world. And all of these things ended up doing two things. One, positioning Gainsight with this movement around customer success that we were kind of creating and championing. And then also it served as our kind of pipeline generation motions. And so 85% of every kind of logo that joined Gainsight over at least the time that I was there was sourced by a marketing program. So they came in through an event or a webinar or engaging with our kind of content programs. And nearly all of the customers
That's
had touched
amazing.
it somewhere along the way.
You know, on my own personal founder journey, that story that is told in your book about going against what the analyst told you to do was actually super influential on me, because I remember getting a lot of inbound from people at Campus Logic saying, "Hey, you've got to position the company this way," and I thought, we spent a couple of years trying to figure out the category of student financial success. And it was because we focused exactly what you said on the persona. Yeah. You used the word, I think, shared passion, but also their shared problems. What's the job to be done? And really like put those front and center and advocate for the problem. And that was super influential on me and my own founder journey. If you go into the Phoenix Ventures office, and you've probably seen this, we have a wall of, there's not a ton of books on there, but there's books on the wall. People can take the books. Category Creation will forever have a place on that book.
Thank you.
I give it to every person who we back. I'm like, hey, you got to read this, because it is certainly informed thinking. When was V1 of Pulse? That's question one. And then two, you use the LinkedIn metric of customer success titles. Yeah. So I wanted to put those two things together. When you got Pulse going, there were maybe like 100 people who had this who identified as, hey, I'm a customer success manager. Yeah. What did that number look like when you got 4, 5, 6 years down the road?
It was in the tens to hundreds of thousands of CSMs by the time I was tracking it.
It's really incredible.
And I think that the piece that was really exciting was LinkedIn releases research reports on the state of like the industry, I think, and they look at it through different regional lenses. And customer success, again, this was 2019 or something, so it was about 6 years later, was one of the top 5 fastest growing professions in the world across all theaters. I think it was like in the top 3 in the APAC region. And so, how do you measure category creation? It's really tough to say, but this is definitely one of them, especially if you're using new language. And so again, customer success wasn't something we coined, but one we hooked onto, is measuring kind of growth in whether it's job titles or references in social media or whatever the case is.
I would say changing the way people self-describe their careers, their jobs, their ambitions is like a pretty good metric. It's a pretty good metric for how successful you are at category creation. So I want to talk about, this, we want to get to the AudiencePlus story here. I could talk to you all day here, but the what you experienced at Gainsight, I think, was highly informative or foundational for what you did at your next kind of couple stops leading up to AudiencePlus. But anything else on Gainsight, the Gainsight story, main lessons learned about either category creation or events or community?
All of it, because you have to remember back then, if you were a marketer in B2B, again, 2013, like the playbook was Aaron Ross and the school of sort of predictable revenue, cold calling, paid, search and pumping dollars there. And what people weren't talking about was these things that we now might refer to even as brand. We're calling it owned media through the AudiencePlus lens, but content didn't really drive revenue beyond SEO. Events were corporate marketing expenses, not demand gen programs. Podcasts were hard to measure and often at the time, not as much of a primary kind of vehicle for actually driving engagement. And so all of the things that we did that worked really well felt counterintuitive to the mainstream kind of marketing strategy of the day. And so I think that led to our success, ultimately, at least in marketing's contribution to the success, because ultimately these programs were authentic and they were human and they were focused on value delivery, not conversions to some type of nefarious MQL kind of target or whatever. So that ended up informing my playbook for how to do marketing in a differentiated kind of human-centric type of way. To your point, took it with me to front and to hop in. But realized pretty quickly that the market was starting to catch up to this strategy. Yeah, one last personal connection to this, and how what was so impressive to me, and we tried to replicate some lessons learned
from what we observed Gainsight doing on category creation here. But Chrissy Wohl, our head of customer success at Campus Logic, went to Pulse 2 years before we bought the product.
Yeah.
And it didn't ever feel like we were being sold the product. It felt like we were being sold the problem. Like, hey, there's a problem here that customer success, like this is where all the value in a company is. We've got to retain our customers. We've got to have happy customers. We've got to upsell, grow, keep, retain our customers. And so we bought into the vision before we bought into the product.
Totally.
But that seems to be a recurring theme, and we were happy Gainsight customers after that.
Well, John Miller talks about this a lot today, where we've really been over-indexed as an industry on converting the 5% of our audience that's paying attention, or sorry, 5% of our TAM who is actually in market to buy a product today.
Right.
But we did that at the expense of the 95% who's listening, and they share that conviction around the problem, but they may not have an active project. They may not know they need to buy software to solve that problem. And so I think the pendulum is shifting, but the Campus Logic story is a great one, because there was sort of like an identification or a shared sort of understanding of the problem. Pulse was a great vehicle for meeting others and kind of comparing notes, maybe even like recruiting and kind of building the team. And in the traditional marketing playbook, like if somebody tried, if Christy, is her name?
Yeah, Christy.
Christy would try to attend the conference, she would have had an SDR try to book a meeting with her and like pitch the demo and all that. And so I think that's where it was a huge asset for us to be able to be again, a bit more human, a bit more authentic with like how we deliver that.
Well,
value.
speaking of the authenticity, one of the things I loved, and there's numerous examples of this, but the content you guys created, like Carpool Karaoke, was amazing. Like I loved that, the timely and funny and real, like, and really really fun content. So that overlay of great content was very inviting into the community too.
Yeah.
Like, tell me a little bit about, like, was that the most fun?
That was up there.
I was toward at the Gainsight experience. So what was your favorite piece of content you guys produced there?
At the Gainsight experience?
Yeah.
There's probably two. I mean, I was fortunate to have a CEO that was okay with crazy ideas and being the person on camera as well, which ended up working out pretty well. Carpool Karaoke was pretty good. One of our values is childlike joy at Gainsight.
Yes.
And so having fun, not taking ourselves too seriously, even though the work that we do is serious. And then a lot of my inspiration, again, going back to like my first principles, didn't come from, hey, what's Salesforce doing? What's HubSpot doing? It was, what's James Corden doing? Or what's that latest bit on SNL or whatever? And how can I find a way to bring that into the workplace? To your point, to make it kind of relatable and kind of like a trend jacking type of play. And so Carpool Karaoke was all the rage, and so we outfitted a car with GoPros and had Nick basically pick up different CEOs and have basically an interview, a conversation with them around like an important topic, but to be interrupted by singing ABBA or Backstreet Boys or whatever. And so that made for some good TV. Probably my favorite though, we recorded a hip hop song.
Yes.
All about customer success.
Yes.
It's actually decent. It's not a bad song.
Yeah.
But we wanted to film this like behind the scenes kind of video for how we recorded it. And we had put so much creative energy into the actual lyrics of the song that we had no plan for this video. All we knew is that we were going to be at Capitol Records, Nick would be there, and the camera crew would be there, and we'd have no idea what we were going to do. And so it was this kind of like weird just moment that happened where the idea was that Nick was going to come in thinking that he was the greatest rapper the world has ever seen and be completely like, not self-aware at all that he was a terrible rapper, like a horrible rapper. And so it was this sort of like The Office like journey of Nick's kind of behind the scenes of doing this song. And so that ended up being a video that was pretty funny for zero kind of prep or kind of, it was pretty much like what's the word? Improv on camera.
I'm gonna have to go check that one out. That's familiar, but I'm trying to think of the specifics on that. So I'm gonna go check that one out again.
Yeah, it was good.
I will say this, last season we had Chris Ronzio on, and he engaged with Montel Jordan to do This Is How We Do It around that. So I think there's a lot of, you probably had more influence in some of these areas than you realize. Let's jump to Hopin real quick. And then I do want to spend like the the last kind of 10, 15 minutes here on your experience at AudiencePlus. That's what we should be talking the most about here, but I always want the lead up here. But what'd you learn at Hopin, and maybe quickly, like one or two takeaways that led to AudiencePlus, and let's spend the balance time on AudiencePlus.
Yeah. Well, you have to remember in 2021, Hopin was the fastest growing company in the world.
Booming.
It was insane. And, it was as we've talked about, reinventing an industry that I cared a lot about in events. And it felt like a too good to be true type of thing. Turns out it kind of was. But it came in as a CMO. Our charter was demand fulfillment, not demand creation or even demand conversion. Like we just had the requested demo form was going off so much that we were hiring people to basically order take, which was unreal. The business grew from, I think, about 2 million to 65 million in 1 year.
Wow.
ARR. It was unheard of.
That's unheard of.
So on the positives, man, we built such a good team. We built an incredible team. I went from like 3 or 4 marketers to, I don't know, it was in the 30s or something when I left, but in 1 year. But really pulled a lot of of the best folks I've ever worked with. And the thing that breaks my heart is we'll never see the output of that team and what could have been. I think there were a couple of big lessons learned, and we can bridge AudiencePlus. But first was, the problem that Hopin was solving with the product was a very specific pandemic-related problem.
Right.
And there wasn't a sort of product strategy shift, or at least enough urgency to really shift gears into that new differentiated approach that was a bit more could outlast whatever COVID was happening with COVID. You could literally look at our requested demo form fills and map it to COVID, kind of the RO map for COVID, and the cases increasing, and it was directly correlated.
Wow.
So COVID cases go up, as did our requested demo form. So that should have been our first clue that something was not working there. Second big learning is we had made the decision to double the sales team in 1 quarter, which ended up being, I think, kind of the one of the worst decisions that we made kind of at the company. But I think also it was tough, right? It was tough going from Gainsight, where Nick was so values driven and built this amazing culture, and Hopin was a great company, but that just wasn't sort of the priority at the time. It was like, how fast can we grow to capture this opportunity?
One of the dark side of insane growth is culture building. It takes time, effort, energy, and that sometimes gets deprioritized, right?
It does. I don't know if you saw it, NVIDIA's CEO was talking about pain and suffering.
Yes.
And when you're
wishing that upon young Stanford students.
Exactly.
Yes.
But that resonated because that builds perseverance and endurance.
100%.
And Hopin didn't see any pain in that climb. So I think that was sort of part of it. And I was, so one of the big kind of takeaways that led to AudiencePlus, more conceptually, I guess, was I saw what greatness looked like with Nick. And I knew that I couldn't live up to that, but I wanted to, if I could go to work every day and put in the calories, put in the effort to not just build a profitable, successful company, but a good company of good people and sort of creating a culture that people were proud to be associated with, that I'd be happy kind of staring in the mirror every day. So that was the kind of clue that was maybe moving from operator to founder was something that terrified me. I'm not sure I'm gonna be good at it, but I think it's worth the effort to try it.
Well, speaking of building companies with great cultures, I can see you doing this at AudiencePlus now. So give us the AudiencePlus kind of story again, and tell us where you're at, tell us what you're excited about. I'm also really excited to talk about Golden Hour coming up here, and because it seems like you're going back to your category creation and event roots, and then taking these learnings from Gainsight, Hopin, and others, and really building an incredible company here.
Well, it was really that, at Hopin deciding afterwards, hey, I want to take the leap. And then we had this active project to basically build something called Hopin Studios, which was meant to be what we did with Pulse at Gainsight, and what we did with this thing called Front Page at Front, we were going to do at Hopin, which is really this idea of saying, how do we build the digital home for thought leadership around our broader category? We did it at Gainsight by basically piecing together a bunch of WordPress templates and using Zapier hooks to kind of get some type of data about who was doing what with our content. At Front, and so at Gainsight it kind of worked, but it didn't look good. It was kind of kludged together. at Front, we used this agency, and it was this beautiful kind of front end that was built on Contentful, I think. But I had to file a support ticket every time we wanted to publish a piece of content, and we didn't have any of the data or analytics. So at Hopin, we were in this now era of Salesforce Plus that was just announced. And I was like, gosh, there's got to be like a Salesforce Plus as a service where we could get all of our content online, not just our written articles, but videos, podcasts, live streams. We can build subscribers to our content, much like what Substack was doing for the creator economy. And beyond that we would have this sort of like data warehouse that sits underneath it that would help us understand what topics are relevant to what cohorts of our audience, or what are the best distribution strategies, or how does all of that engagement actually drive revenue? And that didn't exist. And so that was sort of, I think, the impetus to say, all right, I think I wanted to kind of start a business here, but this is the idea that I've been working towards my whole career. I mentioned earlier, I was like, this is sort of my AudiencePlus is my master's thesis, basically, for my tenure from Box all the way till today. And so we raised, some capital, which we'll get a chance to talk about as well.
Yes.
And started building kind of the core product. What was interesting, we started launching the marketing before we announced the product. So we were kind of trying to, in a similar way, bring some of the Gainsight promise of building an audience before introducing the product or the solution kind of into the audience, but getting a lot of resonance around the problem before we even announced what we were
And probably
building.
some early learnings around, hey, when a prospective customer says, hey, will your product do this?
Yeah.
Like you get informed.
You have an answer.
You have an
Yeah,
answer,
totally.
or the answer might be, it will now.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Give us 2 weeks.
Yeah,
or
give us 2
whatever.
weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, we launched the product in May of this past year. So getting close to a year or so here at the time of recording. And it's been great. Learning a ton. I think a lot of the marketing is coming easy. A little pattern recognition, maybe from, to your point, the Gainsight experience. There's nothing new under the sun. At the end of the day, there's this kind of market education kind of focus that we have. There's community gathering and convening. And so we're bringing a lot of that here. The areas that I'm learning and I'm stretching into is really around product and engineering, and making sure that we're kind of building the right platform, making the right technical kind of architecture decisions, and that we're able to move fast enough to be responsive to our customer needs. We had a couple of kind of false starts, around doing that, but now I think we're in a much better place. So I'm learning a lot in that area, but I think we're really excited because there is this sort of movement orientation around marketing now, because I think all of us are experiencing lead gen is not coming as easy as it used to, at least during the ZERP era, world that we kind of are coming from. There's less resources in marketing than we've had before, but expectations are just as high to deliver. And so it feels like the right time in the industry for something like owned media to be the parent kind of strategy going forward. The same things we were doing 10 years ago, I think now are going to become the primary ways of going to market in SaaS.
A lot of the early listeners, or a lot of the listeners on to this podcast are early stage founders. And so hearing stories from other early stage founders about what they're experiencing in the moment or in the early days is really valuable.
Yeah.
It's like priceless information. When you started, so to that end, when you first started having conversations with early customers, and I know some of your early customers are really well known, like software companies, for example. When you, what was the initial response you got that made you realize, hey, there's something here? Like, is there one or two particular conversations that you had where you could just see this message resonate about owned media?
Yeah, I mean, even before we raised the initial round or built the investor deck, the idea to me came in an iPhone note that I wrote. And then I took the note and screenshot it and sent it to some trusted CMOs in my network. And they're like, yeah, I think there might be something to this. So then I took the note and turned it into like a Google Doc, where I basically took the same Guy Kawasaki framework for building a PowerPoint deck, but I just wrote like a manifesto, if you will, around like the problem that marketers face today, around attention being scarce and paid being expensive from a distribution channel, that third-party algorithms are sitting between us and our audience. So I built out this entire Google Doc and I sent it to a bunch of other CMOs. I'm like, hey, I'll send you guys a DoorDash gift card or something on me. Like, give me feedback. You beat this idea up a little bit. And so they helped validate to a much deeper level the actual problems before we even turned then that manifesto into an investor deck. So I would say we got quite a bit of like early signal before we even kind of honestly made the decision to do a full body kind of yes into starting the company. Over time, what we started doing after we formed the business was finding kind of advisors that could help us kind of validate these assumptions as we were now making them into the UI, into the product decisions. And I learned this from Chris from Sendoso. Basically what we did is we took 1% of equity and we divided it by 100. And we said, hey, we're going to find these CMOs who are busy. They're not going to give us like 5 hours a week or anything along those lines, but we're going to add them to our email list in exchange for 1/100th of a percent of AudiencePlus, in exchange for them like no expectations, but if they wanted to chime in and give us feedback, then we'd appreciate that.
And there's some sense of ownership, right?
Some sense of ownership. Hopefully this thing becomes super successful. Like they'll get something kind of out of it. And so we built this like all-star list of CMOs and demand leaders and content marketers. And what was really interesting is kind of that reciprocity thing, because they had that Carta kind of stock certificate. They were willing to contribute and they were willing to help. And so that showed up in everything from, again, reviewing UI. We had this like website messaging kind of project, which was very humbling because I invited them all into a Figma and it was just destroyed live by like 100 marketers basically. But we were a better company. We are a better company for this kind of community that we've built of advisors and folks kind of within our inner circle. And again, all of that happened before we ever approached one customer about buying the product.
Amazing. Minimum viable idea.
Yeah.
You got the minimum viable idea
sure.
before you got minimum viable product.
Exactly. I call it problem market
Yeah.
fit.
Oh, yeah.
If we can figure that out first, I think that's a decent learning so far, at least from this journey.
Tell me more about you mentioned the capital raise. We're proud to be an investor this seed stage round you just announced or will announce soon. I guess it hasn't been announced as a recording, but I think will be by the time we release this podcast. But tell us a little bit about the investor group you have, which we are super flattered to be part of here. But it seems like you've got a good group of investors in addition to the advisors that the amazing advisors you built up around the table too.
Totally. So, again, very fortunate and excited to be part of the Phoenix Ventures family officially. Some of the other folks around the table, some are Bay Area based investors. So the main anchor, I would say, is Emergence Capital.
What a great investor. Emergence.
They're awesome.
Amazing.
So good. And Santi Subotovsky, what's really interesting is two things. He sits on Zoom's board today. And so he sits on, to share a board member with Eric Yuan feels pretty special. But also Emergence doesn't really do seed deals, which is really interesting. Like they're typically a Series A plus investor. So for them to be like the first, check basically into AudiencePlus was pretty validating, and we're lucky to be a part of that. Several kind of angels. Eric Yuan is an angel. Nick Mehta from Gainsight. Rachel from Guild Education. Rowan Trollope. So I mentioned my semantic story. Rowan was that president. He's now the CEO of a company called Redis. He's an investor. So we've got some great kind of seed kind of partners as well. The other kind of big institutional firm that came in was High Alpha out of Indianapolis. And I often, as I think about the Phoenix journey, I think about what High Alpha is doing for that market in Indianapolis as like an interesting kind of proxy.
I've got some time coming up with Scott specifically to learn about what he built there. I'm going to try to do the same thing with David Cummings and what he's done in Atlanta. I think what's happened in Atlanta and Indianapolis are really instructive to me, and I want to learn from them. What was it? What do you think was it? Emergence is such a great investor. What is it that you think Emergence saw in you and in this business that made them want to jump in maybe a little earlier than they would typically invest?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're on the record with this. So hopefully, Santi, if you're listening, you can tell me if I got this wrong. But I think part of it was they had a thesis around content, which was interesting. Like they had been looking at companies around basically the future of content. They saw the trends in the consumer kind of world that were happening. Because you think about it, in the consumer context, these podcasts have been happening for some time. Like there's live streaming on Twitch, there's short form content on TikTok. And then you turn over to B2B and we're writing SEO articles for search. And you're like, what is the
disconnect?
The disconnect there. So they had a thesis around that. And second, I think they refer to it as like founder market fit. And I think having seen my career journey
sure.
at Gainsight in particular, and seeing kind of how the work we did there could help inform the future of this market. I think that's what drove the investment ultimately.
Yeah, I love it. So let's talk about Golden Hour.
Yeah.
I know we're recording this right before you are going out with Golden Hour here, but tell us about the origin here. This feels like very familiar to what you've done before, but also give us the big vision here. And this will be an artifact when you've got 10,000 people going to this in the future.
Right.
V1 of Golden Hour will look back on this moment here. But tell us about Golden Hour and how you think about this and what you're trying to accomplish with Golden Hour.
Yeah, and I think if you are an early stage entrepreneur listening, you're like, what the heck are you doing hosting a conference again this early? This time's actually a little bit later than Gainsight. We've got probably 6x the revenue Gainsight had at that time when we did it. But a lot of the promise is the same. Marketers have been beat up quite a bit for the last few years. We've all had to figure out the pandemic work from home, balance professional and personal lives, to the post-pandemic boom of spend, hire, kind of build your team, remote, whatever, to the pullback afterwards, where efficient growth became the name of the game and kind of the charter from the CFO. Our teams have been impacted by layoffs quite a bit. And so there's definitely this moment happening in marketing where, in addition to just feeling tired, the playbooks that we've been executing, I referenced the SEO and the marketing automation and inbound playbooks, they're just not working anymore. So it feels like there's this opportunity to find our inspiration again, to find our mojo as a practice. And so that's sort of what the sort of idea behind Golden Hour really is. It's, again, not about our product, all about best practices and inspiration for this next playbook in marketing that we think is more kind of what's coming. But the idea from a format perspective actually came from Hopin, because we saw sort of virtual events really become a thing. We saw hybrid events as a follow-up to it. And really this shifting kind of behavior around people attending events or not attending events, or not willing to travel for content, but wanting to travel for an experience. And so when I think about the traditional marketing conference, again, for marketers, it's like a crowded conference hall, like boxed lunches and like no windows. And it's just, that's sort of the model of like the traditional event. And so we wanted to create something where the medium is the message, where it's experiential, where you're not just learning from the people on the stage, but you're feeling something when you're there, and you're drawing inspiration from kind of what you're experiencing. So for those attending in person, we're doing it at a beautiful hotel in Brooklyn, New York. It's this kind of really great content throughout the day, deep dive workshops. We have this rooftop overlooking the Manhattan skyline, where we're going to do a seated dinner for all attendees and speakers, integrate kind of the two groups. And we have this like live performance by this musical artist, Lindsey Sterling, at Golden Hour. So imagine the sun's setting over Manhattan, and this beautiful kind of violin kind of starts playing, and it creates this moment, this experience for our attendees. And all of this is going to be broadcast globally with a sort of dedicated, hosted live show. If you think about like the Oscars and like the live from the red carpet, or the college, football game, and then the game day desk, where it's like curated expert content. And so we're trying to just set a new bar from a marketing event perspective, and to kind of take a challenger position against, Inbound from HubSpot, which I think is really kind of the incumbent marketing show, and introduce something that's new and differentiated, and hopefully gets people excited to be a part of this next chapter of our industry.
Well, knowing you a little bit and knowing what you've accomplished throughout your career so far, I do believe, when I think about, if I had to place a bet on what I think will be the must-attend event, like 4, 5, 6, 7 years from now, for marketing leaders across the globe, I do believe it will be Golden Hour. I do. That sort of, your ability to not just curate experience, but build a movement has been like nothing I've seen in any company I've been around. So, Anthony, anything else we should talk about with AudiencePlus? Anything else our audience should know here about the amazing work you're doing at AudiencePlus?
I mean, the only thing that's coming to mind is if you are local here, we are hiring. And so if this is, obviously if you're an entrepreneur, I'd love to be helpful to you in your own kind of founder journey. But if you're an operator listening and you want to join kind of a great kind of, to your point, a venture-backed startup here locally with high ambition and a great culture, please reach out to me. We're eager to do something special here locally as well.
Yeah, great. And we'll link out to your career page and some other things on the show notes here. But definitely excited to see AudiencePlus getting built right here in downtown Phoenix. Couple closing questions for you.
Cool.
I ask these same questions. First and foremost, what's something? I think my question is, what's something that you are thankful for? Like when you think about gratitude, something you're especially thankful for.
I mean, I think some of the backstory here. I probably would take another hour to walk through it, but for my family, for the health of my family, we've just gone through a little bit of a health crisis and a little bit of a personal tragedy, unfortunately tied to that. So, being able to have my beautiful wife here, alive, happy, healthy, is important and good, and I'm very grateful for that.
Love it. And then the least important question of the entire interview, but the most interesting to many of our listeners here, best place to eat tacos in Arizona. If you're going to go get tacos, a friend comes to town and says, hey, Anthony, let's go get tacos. Where do you take her or him to go get tacos?
This is not going to be a popular answer, and I might get some hate mail for it. But this is a place right by our old house where we used to live called Crujente Tacos.
That place has been recommended multiple times.
Good.
Yes.
It's a little like neighborhoody and bougie-ish for a taco spot, but man, it's quite good. It's quite good. I think it's award-winning if I'm not wrong.
Yes. No, that's everyone has strong opinions about tacos, but that place has gotten multiple mentions here. So yeah.
All right.
Shout out to Crujente, I think. So I'm sure. I have no idea. I'm sure I'm offending Spanish speakers everywhere. But Anthony, thanks so much for being on the podcast, and thanks for the amazing company you're building right here in Phoenix. And appreciate all you do for our community, and excited to see the progress of AudiencePlus now and in the years to come.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Greg.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.